It's shortly after Michael got out of the hospital and Susan asks him to relinquish his parental rights to Walt so Brian can legally adopt him. And you just have to laugh at the gleefully evil performance by Susan's lawyer in the meeting, barely able to keep a smirk off her face the whole time. I said it before and I'll say it again, if you're going to go to this much trouble to make us despise Susan, the least you can do is let us see her long, painful death. After the meeting, Susan manipulates Michael into letting Walt go, and just like last time, I get the sense that we're supposed to see her side in this, that she'll provide a much better home for Walt, but her absolute refusal to acknowledge that Michael has any right to be upset about her leaving the country to screw her boss and cut him out of his son's life completely destroys any chance of that. Susan brings Walt to say goodbye to Michael, who gives him a polar bear toy. Great, the one thing this whole flashback adds to the story will ultimately turn out to be a complete red herring. Though there actually is an explanation for that, as I'll get into during the summation. This episode's island story actually goes back in time a bit to what other characters were doing at the same time as the last episode. It's a neat storytelling trick that shows up a couple more times, but unfortunately not much is ever really done with it. Here we're back at the raft with Michael calling for Walt, and boy, you'd better get used to hearing that. Sawyer gets him onto a piece of the raft just in time to save him from drowning, and Michael immediately starts calling for Walt again. See what I mean? On the island, it's right after Kate disappeared. Locke heads down and finds her in Desmond's living room, and Desmond comes out asking if Locke is him. And then back to the raft, where Jin's also disappeared, and Michael is naturally pretty angry with Sawyer over insisting they fire that flare. A shark shows up and causes Sawyer to lose all his bullets while checking if they're dry. They start arguing until Sawyer goes to another piece of the raft, and then he pulls the bullet out with his bare hands. Kick ass. Locke tells Desmond he is this mysterious him, but Desmond's been given a code to recognize him with, so there goes that plan. So Locke convinces him that Kate's the one that needs to be tied up and slips her a knife when she's locked in another room. Okay, I'll give him that one for a good recovery. Claire finds Charlie's drug statue, which he denies means anything. That was exciting. Sawyer's figured out that the boat was too small to have come from anywhere but the island, but Michael's in no mood to listen and wrecks his part of the raft. So now they're stuck together again. Happy, Mike? Kate cuts herself free and finds that she's in a pantry, which just makes me want to see her freeze in a hedge maze. Before going up the air vent, she can't resist taking her first bite of chocolate in more than a month and almost has an orgasm. With this coming right after the bondage stuff, some might suspect there were ulterior motives for this scene. Locke tells Desmond everything about the plane crash, and Desmond just asks if anyone has gotten sick, given that whole quarantine thing. The computer starts beeping, so Desmond makes Locke type in the cursed numbers, though oddly enough he doesn't tell him to put in any spaces like we saw in the last episode. Basic continuity, look it up. Locke asks what will happen if he does this. Weren't you Mr. All this is happening for a reason? Don't wuss out right when you might find out what that means. That's when Jack shows up, and there are a couple additions when we see that Kate was trying to shout to Jack over the music, as can actually be heard in the last episode, and Desmond's warning shot almost hits her, though I still say it's not nearly enough to justify structuring the story this way. Sawyer sees a pontoon from the raft and breaks the part he's sitting on trying to paddle to it. That's the cue for the shark to show up again, and we see that it has a logo that will soon become very familiar tattooed on its tail. And of course this will never show up again. Michael shoots the shark, which lets Sawyer get the pontoon. When the sun comes up, they see that they're back at the island, and even Jin's back. But that's not all, because... My score for Adrift is 5 out of 10. You've probably noticed how short this video is, and that's because there's just not much to talk about here. The island story gives us Locke and Kate's point of view without adding anything to our understanding of Desmond, but at least the scenes with Michael and Sawyer are decent character stuff. The flashback is one of the most pointless ever, but for once there's a reason for it. Originally, there was going to be a Sawyer flashback which ended up getting scrapped completely, forcing the writers to churn out a story for Michael very quickly. It was the only time this ever happened, and still the only thing we've been told about why is that the Sawyer story just didn't live up to Lindelof and Hughes' quality standards, whatever the hell that means for two guys who are still proud of whatever the case may be. Though it also has the effect of making Michael's ultimate fate look incredibly unfair, and maybe even a little racist depending on your point of view, which incidentally is one that Harold Perrineau himself has. But that's a story for another time.